Okay, I'd like to welcome you to our session today on where in the world and why does it matter. We have Tama Nunley, who's going to be giving us a presentation. She has 20 plus years of teaching experience as a nationally certified teacher, National Geographic certified educator trainer, and currently president of the Alabama Council for the Social Studies. Tama, I'm going to let you take it away for whatever else you'd like to say, and we'll look forward to seeing that.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. I know that we've probably all had a long day of teaching, and I do want to start off by apologizing. I had the flu last week, and so my voice is a little crackly. And to me, I sound a lot like a chipmunk, so sorry to begin with for how I sound. But I am excited that Pam asked me to go through this with you and to talk about a passion I have. I am a social studies teacher, but a big emphasis that I place in my classroom is on geography. And so the title for tonight, we're looking at Geography Matters Now More Than Ever, because it plays into so many things that we see in our classroom and that we use in our classroom. If we're studying in social studies about historical decisions, or we're looking at political science or economics, all of those things tie into geography. So we're going to really look and delve into exploring how geography affects our understanding of the world. I said we were. Suddenly, there we go. The objectives that I want us to look at tonight is just to kind of introduce you to teaching the geographical perspective and engaging your students in this process. Kind of discuss the standards that we can use to sort of justify the inclusion of geography along with everything else that we teach. Facilitate a little bit of a gallery walk through a resource that is absolutely wonderful to use for this. And then to give you some time afterwards to develop sort of a geography based classroom goal. And you may already be doing some of these things in your classroom. So we're going to, and I always start out by saying, I hate it when somebody stands up and says, well, I'm not going to read this to you. And then they read it to me. So I'm just going to be honest. I'm going to read it to you anyway, because we're not really in that live environment that I know we like to work in. But I want you to understand that geography is changing. It's very dynamic, but it's also changing how we view historical events, how we make local and global economic decisions, political decisions, and how we deal with human and natural made disasters. And in the classroom, geography can change how your students explore and understand any topic because it influences everything. It's all about government decisions, cultural traditions, economics and location, where we live, what we eat. It has implications for our health and the health and safety of the world where we live. Of course, in the state of Alabama, social studies is not always tested like other subjects are, at least not in my district. And so my students sometimes come in with an attitude of, well, it's not that important then if there's no test. But I always tell them that it is tested every single day of their lives in the real world. And that is why geography is important because it is a basis for all of the other social studies and for a lot of the sciences that they study. So let me talk about my classroom for just a minute because I do teach social studies and have for 23 years, along with computer science and journalism. I love to travel and participate in and lead professional development with other educators, advocate on behalf of education, and have fun in my classroom. But most of all, I love teaching history and geography, really all kinds of social studies. But I couldn't truly be more than just an effective teacher most days until I really took a look at what was happening in my classroom. And when I saw that, I changed everything that I was doing, and it has made all the difference. Geography has given me my voice and allowed me to help my students define theirs. And along the way, we've all developed a deeper understanding and appreciation of history than we had before. So when I started looking at what's happening in my classroom, one of the first questions that I ask is, what do students think of when they hear the word history? And so I asked my students this question, and I got this answer. This is what they think of. They think of textbooks. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely love textbooks. I'm that textbook nerd who will sit and read a new textbook all the way through. Uh, I loved it when a teacher gave me a textbook and said, read this, define the words, and answer the questions at the end. But unfortunately, for a lot of our students today, this isn't a relevant way to teach. And they're just not going to get it all from a textbook. So it's a great resource, but it's not always very exciting to the students. And they made sure to tell me that when I asked. So then I asked, well, what do you think of then if I ask you to picture a place or a person in history? And I was given some very startling answers. They look at everything as black and white because most of the pictures, at least in early American history, for example, they're in black and white because that's how they were taken. And even if they're looking at an old map, it may be colorful, but it looks very, very confusing because the detail, it looks more like a painting than a real map. And so to them, it's places that are far away and people that are long gone, and there just isn't any relevance to them. They don't know the people, and so why should they care about them? And if it's not tied to them and not personal, then it doesn't make it with this generation. So the real problem was how I was approaching teaching the subject that I love and just expecting everybody else to love it as I did. And so I kind of changed it and began to tell stories. And what allowed me to do that is using this geographic lens that we're going to talk about. So currently, we look at how most students learn history. It's taught as a set narrative, so a process that reinforces this mistaken idea that the past is all just one single event that you can put in several hundred pages of text, and that's it. That's all they need to know. And of course, we know that that's not the case. Even though students see it as black and white, a bunch of words on a page, and they don't view it as real, we understand that those people and places were real and that they are very relevant to the types of lives and the way that we do things today. So this is not the way that we want our students to look at history. You know, a timeline's useful, but we just don't want them to look at it as, well, this happened and then this happened and this happened, and it not tell a story that resonates with inside them. What we want them to do is quite different than the way that my class, and this is actually a picture of my class at one point, and this is on a good day, right? They're sitting there, they're working, but they don't look very happy, or at least they don't to me, because when I was teaching the old way, this is exactly how they look. Were they engaged? I guess you could make a case to say that they were. Were they learning? Probably a few things, but they really weren't very excited about it. And you can definitely see that on their faces. What we want, and what ultimately I've been able to get into my classroom, is my kids looking like this, because I found a way to infuse this excitement and relevance into the curriculum by including a geographic attitude. So one sure way to revitalize the classroom is to view topics differently than the way that we normally teach them, and to show that social studies can change and that everything happens somewhere, and we can apply that geographic lens to see this. This helps students to explore their own world and to understand it in different ways. They become the people who are interpreting events and recognizing the connections and the importance of those events. It really shows why where is important. You know, the science of where is the science of geography. Everything happens someplace. And we want our students to recognize those places, because it's not just a collection of facts that they're looking at. It is a collection of people exchanging different, often conflicting points of view. And again, it all happens somewhere. If I could underline one thing to my kids, is I'm always trying to tell them history happened somewhere, and it happened to real people. And so I'm telling them stories, but I want them to also be able to tell their own stories as well. And by using this geographic lens and really bringing home to them their sense of place, then they're able to make connections and they are able to tell that complete story. So just think about the role that we know that geography has played in historical events. I mean, we can look at World War II and the invasion of Normandy. We can look at any war for that matter. The assassination of John F. Kennedy doesn't happen the way it happened in any other location, maybe. We've been looking at imperialism in my classroom. That's all about geography. And even today's issue about migration and immigration, then there's a story to tell with geography. So we're already teaching these things in our classroom. One way to make it exciting is to point out the geographic factors involved. And it also helps us to cover our standards, because even though our standards may be very explicit in history, for example, we also have this C3 arc that we're supposed to be covering, getting students ready for college and career life. And that's the goal of all educators. You know, whether you like the term college and career ready, the goal is to get them ready for those things. And so we want to not just be a history teacher or a civics teacher or an economics teacher or a geography teacher, but we want the students to learn all of these social studies components. And the C3 framework allows them to do that. By asking geographic questions, acquiring data and organizing it in some way, analyzing it, and then answering the question. So in fact, they're forming their own inquiries because they are making their own plans to develop a question. And they're looking at all of the disciplines. They're not just looking at history, but they're looking at economics and civics and geography. And they're evaluating those primary sources and using them as evidence, and then taking action in some way and communicating them to someone else. And this makes it a lot more active and alive in a classroom. One goal that we have as educators is to get the students ready for the future. And we're always taught to use critical thinking skills with our students to provide that rigor. And spatial thinking is all about that critical thinking and rigor. So spatial is special, and that's a little play on words. But if you look at this picture of this iceberg, what I like about it is the phrase, what we see of this iceberg is only a fractional part of what really is. And what students see about history or economics or civics or any topic is only what they see on the surface, unless they can really dive into it. And using spatial thinking and geography and inquiry, they're able to dive into it. I mean, after all, you know, it's not the top portion of this iceberg that took down the Titanic. It's actually what was beneath the surface that they couldn't see. And so for our students to be successful and to make their voyage, then we want them to have the full picture. We want them in a way to actually start thinking as scientists in our social studies classroom. And if nothing else, that's definitely going to make social studies more relevant. So geography is the science of spatial relationships of humans and their environment. It's not one or the other. You know, and that's the neat thing, is you get to put both of them together. And that's what we do in history anyway. When we look at a war, for example, we're very much talking about the environment where it took place, but we're also looking at the human story as well. Geography encompasses the physical and human world by examining what is where, why is it there, and what can we make of it. And I'd even add to that, and why should we care, right? Because that's what the kids ask all the time. Why should we care? And using this geographic perspective allows them to see why they should care and to come up with their own reasons. Because geography is spatial. It is already a critical thinking arena. It helps us to identify patterns and distributions, diffusion, circulations, and interactions, and the ways in which the physical and human worlds are laid out and interconnected, and the way that they interact. And that's really a huge, to me, important skill that they need to take with them from my classroom, because the world is just getting more and more complex and confusing. And so we could ask the question, why is geography important? You know, a lot of us went to school to only maybe teach history or only maybe teach this. So, you know, why am I going to include geography? And I would say we're probably already doing it in our classrooms, because these are some of the list of things that you cover when you're talking about geography. And there are also things that you cover when you're looking at history or civics or economics as well. So you've got globalization and cultural diversity, politics and government, location, environmental issues, the economy and sustainability issues, human and natural hazards. And if you take and add all of these together, then you have 21st century skills, and students are prepared to step out into that next part of their life, whether it's going straight to work or going to college first. And the list just actually goes on from there. It gives students a valuable perspective that tells the story of why modern geography is important for leadership in all areas. Geographic understanding can lead to sensible decision making in politics and economics and environmental issues, as well as to become a better, more informed citizen. Teaching it in the United States public schools is so vital, and I think now, especially with all the issues that we have going on and all the arguments and opinions that are out there about them. And we're going to discuss these over the next few slides. So if you're talking about globalization in a classroom, there are several different things that you can discuss with students to show why it's important. And in a way, they're already looking at this anyway, because in history, we know that there are certain events that have shaped decisions. And to a lot of it, it's all about the geography of a location. Whether the issue is domestic or international, if you're talking about business dealings, a business doesn't just happen in a vacuum anymore. We are so global today that it has implications all the way around the world. Importing and exporting, making a consumer decision. Do I buy this product or do I buy this product? Do I buy made in America, or is it okay if the company is operating out of another country? And seeing how we are spatially connected, because now more than ever, these decisions are both personal and societal. There's an increasing interaction of people, states, and countries through this growth of the international flow of money and ideas and culture. And it's primarily an economic process of integration, but it also has social and cultural aspects as well. And the decisions that you make in the business world definitely have a strong connection to society as a whole. And as the world becomes ever more interconnected, a practical knowledge of geography then becomes more critical, because we want future citizens who are able to understand the differences in people and cultures and to make informed decisions about our role in the United States or in any country in world affairs. Because it's so easy now for us to reach out and reach other people around the world, not just with a simple phone call anymore, but through the use of technology. Another topic that to me is really important today is cultural diversity, because I think that a lot of our talking points today deal with a lack of understanding to some extent about differences in culture and a lack of respect for differences as well. And these are things that students maybe get even better than adults, and they're able to talk about it a little bit more. Because they just sort of get that people are different. And maybe that's a middle school thing for me, because everybody's different in middle school. But we're talking, about immigration in our classrooms. It's in the news. We're talking about it. I'm sure that in economics, trade is something that's always important to mention. These kids are going to be traveling, or just talk about tourism as an industry all on its own. Look at the impact in the islands, like in Puerto Rico and the Barbados after the hurricane, and the impact that's going to have on their culture because they rely on tourism. Diplomacy. Students need to understand that sometimes, it can't just be one way or the other, that there has to be a compromise, and you can't make those compromises if you don't understand somebody else's culture. And the military. We have people stationed all over the world, and those people, for one, have to understand about cultural diversity, because they're going into locations where if they don't know somebody else's culture, it's going to get them into trouble. But it's also important for us to look at it from the standpoint of, when do we send somebody in, or where do we send them, and how do we approach that? What actions are we going to take? Because we don't want to do anything other than tread lightly on some of the beliefs and traditions. that are important, because to people, their identification is directly through language and religion and ethnicity, those traditions and values that they hold dear, because it very much shapes their definition of place. And I think it's important for our students to know their own definition of their place. Right here in Alabama, I live in a small town, Guntersville, Alabama, and they need to know about this place because there is cultural diversity here as well. And it just to me makes it a lot more interesting and students more productive if they understand each other. Politics and government. This is something that we cover in all forms of social studies, and it's all about the policies and leadership, and it goes back to a geographic understanding of these global issues, whether you're talking about something that's local or you're talking about something that's regional or something bigger than that. A local government issue may not affect somebody in another part of the region, but pretty much every state maybe in a region has an issue that brings you together. And so it's not just about division. And then also security and safety today, because we do have to deal with terrorism in the world today, whether homegrown or not, or domestic or international. And these are topics that you have to discuss with children, because I know my students are scared today. The world has become a scarier place to them than it has probably since I was a child, and they want to talk about these things. They understand the world is complex, and continues to change at a very rapid pace. And I think they're getting to the point where they know they must understand each other. And these geographic perspectives provide critical insights into these issues. It helps to understand ongoing conflicts, why we make foreign policy the way that we do, or maybe how we should make foreign policy. And they react sensibly then to turmoil and economic turnovers. And these are going to be the people that are making these decisions for us in the future. So if you're into real estate, you always hear that it's all about location, location, and location. And that's really what geography used to be all about. The geographic bee, where they ask you what's the capital of Turkey, and you answer. That's not what geography really is anymore. It's a lot more of the doing and the tools than anything. But you do have to understand about place as well, because place impacts things like infrastructure. You wouldn't want to go into a place like Miami and build something that can't withstand a hurricane. You wouldn't want to go to San Francisco and build something today that can't withstand an earthquake of a certain magnitude. And so you have to look at the vulnerability of a location as well as a population. For example, if you're wanting to put in a veterans hospital, then you need to be located in a place that is central to veterans in your state. Or if you're looking at services for the elderly, you are looking at where is the largest population of elderly in my city or in my state, my community. You want to be able to manage your resources. If you're looking at transportation models, should we build a metro system in Birmingham like they have in DC or Atlanta, like the MARTA? And where will this take us in the future for future development? Because the kids that we have now are going to be the ones making these developments in the future. And then also understand, I absolutely live in this location. This is my home, and this is what I need to know about it. And then in relation to other parts of the state and other parts of the world as well, and realizing the similarities and differences, because it's all about making choices. If you're going to locate a factory or a retail outlet or provide a service, and you've got to look at the location, because you want to reduce costs, but you also want to put it in the most advantageous place. So a lesson that I'm going to be doing with my students in the coming weeks is tied to the Olympics that will happen in South Korea. And I've already had kids ask me, why did they choose South Korea? With all this going on with North Korea, why in the world would they choose that location? And of course, it was chosen many years ago before, the current heating up of an old conflict. But there are other reasons why South Korea was chosen over other locations. And so, one thing that I'm going to have my students do is an inquiry about places that would be good for either the Winter or the Summer Olympics. So, you really tie it into what is important to them. What about place? And most of the time, it's where do they live, or give me directions on how to get to the beach or the ball game or whatever. But we can take that a little bit further for them. Then we also have environmental issues that we have to look at. As our nation and the world face increasing environmental pressures, a perspective in geography offers a critically needed understanding of the relationships between human activity and the condition of this planet. There's an uneven distribution of energy and also uneven consumption. So, how do we solve those problems and yet balance it with nature? There are a lot of new methods that are out there. I know my students today were talking about, you see the trash in the picture at the top there. That's actually on a beach, but there's trash and pollution in the ocean that can actually be seen from outer space. And so my students were talking about where they had seen something on television and read something, different methods for collecting that pollution out of the ocean and maybe even reusing it in some way. So looking at conservation and preservation, do we take a national park and cut part of it out? Do we need more or less national parks? Why do we have national parks? You can look at the climate change debate or debacle, however you want to approach it. Looking at pollution issues and human environment interaction. Are we helping it? Are we hurting it? Is it helping us or is it hurting us? So there's a lot of issues there that I know that we're discussing in our social studies classes anyway, that you can really do kind of a deeper dive with your students. And of course, the economy, because ultimately, that's what concerns them most, whether they know it or not. That's what concerns their parents. Employment needs. Why would a factory choose to move to Alabama instead of Georgia or Massachusetts or wherever? Job growth versus reduction. What causes both? How do you manage and use the resources that you have and communicate with each other? What kind of trade practices does your state have with other states or with other nations? What kind of government policies impact your local economy? And just location and distribution. Look up some of the maps about what are people's favorite products, or what is a company that is found in their state, and they love that, and it gives them a better sense of their place in the world. For example, if you look at the map of Texas and you see Dr. Pepper, that they make Dr. Pepper in Texas. That's one of their big bottling companies, and it just gives kids just a better sense of things, and also tying it back into the whole cycle of business, where there's some government regulation, and you're using these things in your house, and helping them to make some better consumer decisions as well. Sustainability is very important. And it also goes along with environmental issues to some extent. But basically, there are so many of us here now, and there's going to be so many of us in the future. How are we going to be able to maintain the planet? And sometimes the kids have better answers maybe than we do. Looking at our interdependence on each other, population growth figures, the fact that in many locations medicine is better now than it was then. Death rates are declining. Birth rates are increasing, and how are we going to manage all this? Sustainably, how are we going to deal with the overcrowding of the planet? And then something that's all too familiar to most of our students, hazards and disasters. Not only do they see them on TV all the time, but also they experience them in their own communities. In particular in Alabama, of course, we have to worry about storms and sometimes flooding more than anything else. But these are real concerns for students, and it impacts their lives in many different ways. And then you also have those human hazards as well. Water shortages and health and sanitation issues, and even some communities that are doing the slash and burn and deforestation, and that puts a real struggle on their systems, and sometimes that impacts immigration or migration into other locations. So again, a lot of things that you can look at. And overall, it all equals our goal to prepare our students for the 21st century. And again, whether or not you like the term college and career ready, because I know we teachers kind of get tired of the same old terminology, but it really is all about just providing our students with a cultural knowledge that's going to allow them to get that job one day, and for them to be able to better communicate with each other, collaborate with each other, meet the needs of whoever their employer is going to be. And it all involves critical thinking, which can be done through this geographic inquiry and also through the use of geographic technology. So what you have on the screen here is an example of GIS, Geographic Information Systems, and how they use different data sources and layers to get a better picture of something that's happening in the world. And my students really love to look at this when we look at historical events, like the John Snow cholera map. He was able to figure out the water pumping station that was infested and shut it down to stop the cholera deaths. And he basically made one of the first GIS maps that there is, by putting points on a hand drawn map of the city. So these are skills that people are looking for today. Uh, the term is jobs for geographers, but you don't necessarily have to say you're going to be a geographer. There are all kinds of different jobs, from being a diplomat to a real estate appraiser, being a GIS specialist, a climatologist, a meteorologist, to even working outdoors at a national park. So there's a lot of different jobs that you could introduce your students to in one of the fastest growing areas for job growth. And all of these make pretty good to really good money for your students. So we talked a little bit about GIS a few minutes ago, and I just wanted to kind of share again that this is a great way to use technology in your classroom, with huge ramifications for all of the social studies, especially in research. It's a spatial way to tell stories, and there's a lot of different GIS products out there. You can uniquely inform historical research by looking at those spatial patterns, like when we were talking about John Snow's cholera map. The power of GIS really lies in its ability to integrate almost everything and then allow your students to visualize it. And what's really great is when the students are the ones doing the researching. So one of my new favorite tools that I have been introduced to recently is Stratalogica, which is produced from Nystrom Education, and it includes maps, charts, atlases, and globes, but it really makes them come alive in an environment where teachers and students actively engage in a multi-layered environment that's very interactive. So it's great for the kids to get their hands on it. It's also great for you to put up on a whiteboard with your projector or a computer. And the great thing about it is it does work with a lot of different systems. So it's not one of those things where you grab up a Chromebook and this isn't going to work with it, or you're using a MacBook and it's not working. And again, it's something that you can have a kid go up to the whiteboard and easily manipulate. My favorite part about it, other than the fact that it's completely web-based and it works with all these different operating systems, is the fact that it is so incredibly visible. And I'm going to show you some pictures here in just a minute. And so this is a tool that you could easily use in your classroom to do almost anything you wanted and to cover these topics we've talked about. One of my favorite parts, before I get to my favorite, is the free trial that you get. So if you go out and look at Nystrom Education, Stratalogica, then it will offer you a free trial, and please go do that and play with it. But this is what I absolutely love about it. It is beautiful to begin with, and kids love it if it's very vivid and very colorful and visual. You can do almost anything with this. I sat for probably an hour the other day just spinning the globe, just looking at different parts, the north and the south. And again, it's very colorful. You can zoom in and zoom out. You can look at it in this 3D format, or you can go to a 2D map. It opens up and lays down if you're looking at an area. So you type in, say, Guntersville, Alabama, and it goes to Guntersville, Alabama. Well, then you also can have it fold out like a paper map on the screen. So it's really very cool to work with. A lot of tools in the toolbox that you can use. The atlas I really like because it's it's not just one atlas, it's a collection of atlases in the library. And in this library, you've got everything from kindergarten through 12th grade. So if you're in an elementary reading class and you're supposed to be teaching social studies, then all you really need to do is just pull one of these up and just go through it daily with the kids. And they're really going to get so much of this geography and social studies that they need. My favorite part of it, however, are the historical maps. I always have a very hard time finding a good historical map for my students, unless there's one in a textbook. And there are 32 historical maps, and they are absolutely as beautiful as the one that you're looking at. They're vividly detailed. You can click on them and see different parts of the story that this map's telling. And they're not all just based in American history or world history. You've got some of everything, and that's what I really like. I'm not just limited to one section of history or another. I talked a minute ago about the atlases. So again, you're not just talking about the United States history or world history. It's got everything, and for every grade level. And this is all included inside the library at this website with that beautiful globe. So now I have been able to take my students and give them this. And to me, they look a lot happier than they did earlier. They're still learning. They're very much engaged. But they're just a lot more excited about social studies in general than they were before. And to me, that's the big goal. And whatever I need to do to make that happen, that's what I'm going to do. So in closing, I would like to give you Pam Gothard's information for you to be able to contact her for more information. She also could get you back in touch with me if you wanted to brainstorm or you want to know a little bit more about how the program works or anything really. And I am going to give you a minute for him to open up the chat and let you ask me questions if you'd like. But I did want to take a minute to thank socialstudies.com for letting me share my passion for teaching with you tonight.
Tama, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation and certainly captivated my attention. Really appreciate your participation there. We can open it up to questions at this point in time, and just once again want to thank you for your insights and sharing your enthusiasm.
Well, thank you. I have to admit I was a little nervous when Pam first approached me about it. But again, this is my passion, teaching, period, but teaching social studies and really getting people excited about the subject. So I appreciate the opportunity to share tonight.